I was thinking about maybe what's a better way? What's a better way to do this whole immersive thing?
Mhm.
You know, um, just because again, I watched that the scene from No Time to Die. It's kind of
Yeah.
a scene that I go back to because I've been messing around with different effects and stuff. But I went and watched that. I'm like, there's nothing happening here, right? As far as Atmos, anything like that. There's nothing happening in the height channels. And I understand from Reverend Slim that he said that they only had 2 weeks to make the whole mix. So they didn't have time to do it.
2
Right? Yeah.
weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's interesting because I've been watching
Not cool.
a lot of these mixers. Like there's channels where these guys who mix in Atmos, they all kind of get together and they talk about, they're just talking shop, right? What they do, their process, things that they have issues with, what translates, what doesn't translate. The one I'm watching is called like Lost in Translation. That's what they call their podcast thing. Kind of cool if you guys are interested. But I guess what I'm thinking is, yeah, it's tough when it comes to not having enough time, right? So that movie, it was more a time constraint. But for the end user, it's kind of disappointing, right? If you're excited to watch a movie, you this whole thing up, you go to watch like, nothing's happening, right? And I think that's when the Oro upmixer can work. But here's the next step further, right? Here's the next step. It kind of makes sense to me. Like, if they don't have time, wouldn't it make sense to have metadata for the space? So let's just say with Dolby Vision, they have metadata, right? That tells you about like, how stuff, the HDR should be mapped, tone mapped. It seems to me that it would make the most sense and like the best use of the bandwidth is to say, you know what, this scene is in this like cave, right? This is what this room should kind of sound like, right? So add these kinds of reverb and reflections for this particular room. Next scene, we're outdoors. Choose the outdoor mix, and then it would just be easy. And then your processor should decode that and make the proper sound for each space. To me, that makes the most sense because people could do it quickly. They could override it if they wanted to, but it would be something like if you only had 2 weeks, you can still get a good experience, and it wouldn't take that much data, right? What do you guys think about that? Does that make sense to you guys?
A little bit.
No?
Yeah.
No?
Elon, did you follow?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's like it's
kind of.
It's as if like, there should be some sort of baseline. If you're mixing in Atmos, there should be some sort of baseline like, okay, I've got these plugins, I've got these presets, I'm mixing in Atmos, so I'm just automatically going to be dealing with these presets and these plugins. Because yeah, it shouldn't really matter how many speakers you have. You can have 30 speakers, you can have 7, mixing on a 7.1.4, post-production facility or something, like, as long as it somehow tells the 4K Blu-ray disc or Netflix or whatever, as long as it tells it to matrix it properly, then we should be getting amazing Atmos mixes every time.
I think the hard part is because we have so many different, like I even did a poll with my audience of like, what type of configuration do you have? 5.1.2, 5.1.4. I could do a bunch because it only allows you so many options, but because everybody has so many different setups, I think it is hard for engineers because they're mixing for, a certain, at least minimum bed layer. Maybe that's a 7.1.2, or I'm sorry, 7.1.4. So if somebody has only 5 speakers on the bed layer and then only 2 speakers up top, it's going to be really difficult to kind of reproduce that, even though the metadata says, okay, we'll just send the, the rear Atmos speakers to the 2 in the middle. Well, I mean, even Chana posted, I think, his video today. He was talking about how, you're going to miss that pan from front to back. So
Right.
and you physically can't do anything about that. So I think for the most part, you're still going to have to, whether it's an Oro setup, whether it's an Atmos setup, whether it's DTS X, you're going to need like a minimum speakers. Then if you've got more speakers, then of course the AVR or processor, it's going to know what to do with those. But I think it's the opposite is where we kind of run into issues, and we don't hear it maybe properly because we just don't have sufficient speakers to make that happen. And I've always tried to tell people when you have two Atmos speakers, I kind of equate that to having only two front speakers and trying to get surround sound out of it. It's really hard to do that. I mean, you can get an immersive kind of enveloping sound from a pair of speakers, but you can't reproduce only sounds from the back and separate that from sounds from the front with just two speakers. It's just physically impossible to do that. And so I'm a big proponent of having 4 Atmos speakers. I just don't think it's really difficult to get that proper placement and proper positioning with just 2. And I think I even read somewhere just recently, they were saying if you don't have 4 Atmos speakers, you actually don't have object placement or objects. Is that what? You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't use objects. I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting. I just always assumed that, if it said Atmos on your AVR, then all right, it's sending Atmos objects to each speaker, but that's maybe not the case.
Yeah, I think, what is it? 7.1.2 is like, you can have a static mix, which is 7 bed layer, 2 heights, and nothing. It can all be channel based.
Yeah.
It's when it goes from the 2 heights to the 4, that's when it becomes object.
Yeah.
And even then, I'm not sure that it makes a huge difference. Like if it was all channel based, I wouldn't really have an issue with that,
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, somebody was saying, having the metadata to produce a sound is might not be the best idea because, they'll all sound the same, right? And I guess I was just figuring maybe they should make that easy, right? That should be something that they can easily implement to make the sound good. And I think most of the stuff that's been said here it's not really Atmos's fault because they provide the tools to be able to move stuff around, right? Making it sound realistic and actually using it, that's a whole different thing. But it's kind of tough because they are also promoting it as something that's going to be this immersive sound, and if it's not that, we can say, hey, if you didn't have enough time, that's the reason. That's a reason why it's not good. But then it's also maybe they don't have enough tools. Maybe they don't have enough tools, and maybe the expectations are too high, right? And that's what I'm trying to kind of just bring down to a realistic level. So when people are spending money on this stuff, they understand, okay, this is what it can and cannot do, and hopefully people will come up with ways to make it better. Because I think a lot of these guys are just assuming that they're making something in Atmos that everybody's just automatically impressed. And I hope they see some of our videos and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, somebody's actually paying attention to see if these are good mixes. Yeah, that's basically.
Now, if you can't catch the show, we do have an audio version at anchor.fm/daily HiFi. So make sure to go on over there if you like to listen to the show.